Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Starting Small. Today, I'm joined by Dorrian Porter of Vestaboard. Dorrian, thank you so much for joining me today.
Great to be here.
Yes, I'd like to start out with your upbringing. Where did you grow up, and what would you say your childhood was like?
I grew up in British Columbia, Canada, first in a small town outside Vancouver called Mission, British Columbia. And then I moved with my family to Victoria, British Columbia in 1986. So I did my middle school, high school in Victoria,
Mhm.
and then I went off to the University of Ottawa and University of Toronto from there.
Incredible. So, growing up as a kid, what were some of your aspirations pre-college? For example, what did your parents do? Did they have an influence on that as well? Or I'm curious your mindset at that time.
Yeah, I mean, hopefully, like all of us, childhood is a bit of a blur, at least
Yeah.
for those of us who moved in middle school in 1986. But I had two great parents, mom and dad. I had an older brother. We were definitely raised in a, I'm certainly, we were definitely kind of a standard family as far as I know,
Yeah.
going off to elementary school. My dad, I remember, used to do a lot of different jobs when I was young, especially around the forest industry.
Hmm.
And then he kind of migrated over to insurance. And then at some point, he did go out and start up his own insurance company,
Mm.
which I know lasted a couple of years. And I remember it failed within a couple of years.
Mm.
So we went through a little bit of a small financial crisis at one point, and then I think his new job took him to be involved in car sales over in Victoria,
Mm.
which is how we ended up there.
I see.
My mom tended to be at home with us there when we got back from school and to go to school with. Um, and we kind of went to church every Sunday type of thing as a
Yeah.
child. And I would say, it's really hard for me to pinpoint aspirations because I went off to Victoria, which was great, and started high school and junior high school in Victoria. And for really was the first kid, I think, on either side's parents, at least the parent tree, that went off to university in around 1990. So I was the
Mm.
first in our family, I think, to go off to university, at least in the direct lineage.
Mm.
And it's hard for me to pinpoint why or how I knew that because I
Yeah.
don't have specific recollections of my mom or dad encouraging me to go to university.
Yeah.
It was really left up to me what I was going to do, but I did develop kind of a determination to go off to university, which is what I did after grade 12.
Incredible. I'm curious. You said you kind of pinpoint why at that time. But what did you end up going into studying then at this point? And then what were your aspirations through the university time?
Yeah, it was, I think at the time in grade 12, so I was definitely during high school, you know, relatively academic, kind of interested in things like mock debating and whatnot, kind of interested in politics.
Mm.
So there was a program in Canada that was a national program that recruited 42 high school graduates to be pages in the House of Commons in Canada.
Mm.
And so I think they drew from every province, and so they selected 6 people from British Columbia to go off to Ottawa to be a page in the House of Commons for first year university. So if you
Mm.
got that scholarship, for lack of a better term, you got paid and you went to University of Ottawa or Carleton. I chose the University of Ottawa, and I was a page in the House of Commons. And then from there, got pretty interested in politics, worked for a couple of members of parliament, ended up working for Kim Campbell, who was a member of parliament from Vancouver, who ended up becoming prime minister while I worked with her
Wow.
and for her because of the timing of the resignation of a prime minister named Brian Mulroney.
Mhm.
And Kim Campbell became our first female prime minister. And then that was the same summer. I think I was graduating from University of Ottawa and then had already decided to apply to law school and business school. And so went from Ottawa pretty quickly, just spent 3 years at undergraduate, got a Bachelor of Social Sciences and Public Policy, and took that to University of Toronto for a JD MBA program for 4
Wow.
years.
Wow. At this time, were you working any jobs, or I know it can be hard to balance, especially once you get into law school. I'm curious, did you have some internships that were very monumental through your career during this time, or what did that look like?
Yeah, well, I definitely was lucky that I got to work for members of parliament while I went to undergrad. So I think one
Yeah.
year of that PAGE program. I remember that summer of the PAGE program, though, it was definitely about the odd job. So I think I think we still technically got paid or had been paid through August, but Parliament had ended in May or June. And so I think a lot of us who were in that program were like, okay, we need to find jobs. I remember that summer I worked at a restaurant for sure. And then I also got involved in selling suits at a kind of a fire sale. It was actually a great company in Canada that's still around called Harry Rosen, but
Okay.
they had some kind of liquidation sale out in Ottawa somewhere in some big warehouse. And I always remember taking on that job, I think because a friend had done it. And I think that friend is down here in near Palo Alto with me now and has been down here for 25 years with me. But he had the job there, I think. And then I
Yeah.
got the job to sell suits. It might have only been 3 or 4 weekends. And I remember we got a commission of $5 per suit, which at the time was a big deal to get $5 a suit. And so had to do my best compliments to people when they put on their jackets to tell them how good their suits looked once they were on.
That's
Uh,
great.
so I did that, and then I had those couple of great jobs with members of parliament, and then in law school, I remember first year. Uh, I got some good stories from that, but I won't tell it here. Looking for a job after first year law school because
Yep.
we didn't land any law jobs. I remember it was hard to land a job right out of first year law school in the summer. And then I spent a couple of summers after that. So in second and third year, I spent summers at the same law firm that I ended up joining after law school,
Mhm.
a firm called McCarthy Tatro in Vancouver, British Columbia. It was a national firm. They have offices in Toronto, Montreal, Calgary, and Vancouver. And so I worked out of the Vancouver office for a couple of summers and then did what they call articling in Canada, which is kind of a 1 year, not internship, but articleship
Yep.
prior to becoming a lawyer. And then when I became a lawyer in Canada, I actually moved down to become a lawyer in Palo Alto, California, at a law firm down here for a year and a half. And then that really was this place that I kind of launched my entrepreneurial efforts after just spending a year and a half as a lawyer down in Silicon Valley.
Incredible. Yeah, I'd love to hear this kind of time period for yourself. I saw some of your background. You were a corporate attorney for some time right out of school. And then you were an entrepreneur. You founded some other companies as well, even prior to Vestaboard. If you can explain kind of the shift from corporate attorney world and then to your own ventures as well, and kind of how this led to that career journey for you.
Yep. Well, Vestaboard's third company. So I started one in 2000, another one in 2005, and then Vestaboard in 2015.
Yep.
I think when I came down as a lawyer, I came down to Palo Alto, not knowing how nice the weather was totally down here, other than the lure of California.
Mm.
But came down knowingly that I probably wasn't going to last as a lawyer. I found a job at a law firm that made it easier to kind of transfer over, get the appropriate immigration requirements, kind of get a sense of what it was like. It was a really fascinating time because I started in January of 1999
Mm.
and went through till end of March or April of 2000. And in that time period, I don't think it could be denied that any corporate lawyer working at the time probably worked on more deals in those 18 months or 16 months than any other time. It was
Yep.
a continuous flow of kind of the dot-com era of companies getting funded, of companies going public, of lots of M&A and activity.
Mm.
So I think in that span of 16 months, I worked on something like 23 deals,
Wow.
everything from a $12 million investment to what ended up being a $5 billion merger.
Wow.
And so that whole period was quite a contracted but very fascinating way to get a really good corporate legal training.
For
A lot
sure.
of it was by fire. A lot of the firms that the associates at Wilson Sonsini at the time worked on, a lot of the firms we worked with, like in New York or Philadelphia or other places or Toronto, They didn't necessarily enjoy working with these young kids that were 1 or 2 years out of law school trying to figure out how to do corporate deals. Because even though we had great lawyers working above us, everyone was so busy that we were given a lot of responsibility at that law firm. And I remember being on deals, even with a firm that I knew back in Toronto, where there were 5 or 6 lawyers on the other side. There was kind of my level, who was just a year or two out of school, a couple of associates, a couple of partners, the senior partner, and I was doing the deal with all of them at the same time, representing our client. So in some regards, I knew I had made a pretty good decision to accelerate my legal career.
Yeah.
Because the point of all this is I kind of knew going in that, I probably enjoyed most in business school, doing the creative, start a business type case studies, what would you do if you had to create a business, and presenting that plan and coming up with the idea. Even in undergrad in Ottawa, I remember being really excited about creating a product for a class, and you had to come up with the marketing plan for that product and try to launch the product. And so I think I'd always enjoyed during undergraduate just the idea of creating things and trying to bring something to life from scratch.
Yeah.
So I knew that was in me. And one of the reasons to come down to Silicon Valley back in 99 was just, I guess, end of 98, was just to know that the internet was going to change so much, and feel that building a business or something creative around the internet was going to be promising in some regard.
Yeah.
And so that's really what brought me down here at the time.
To the listeners, if you can kind of explain how these ventures looked. We know we'll dive into Vestaboard really specifically, but those ventures that you then founded out, what kind of industry were you focused in, especially once you went into Silicon Valley? What was that?
I mean, my first company?
Yep.
So the first company was called Higher Markets. It was a B2B platform for universities and colleges to procure their goods and services.
Yep.
So at the time in 1999, 2000, in fact, one of the large mergers I worked on was a B2B platform, what they used to call marketplaces back then. So the idea was, if eBay or Amazon could aggregate these goods and services to sell to consumers in a marketplace style, the same would happen in the B2B market. And so me and a couple of others that I met while I was down here in that year, I had worked for the CFO of the University of Toronto when I went to the university. One of my main clients was doing a lot of B2B marketplace activity. So we set out to do that for the higher ed market. And it was, definitely challenging trying to figure out, because first of all, most companies back then didn't really have a great business model. Some of it made sense. Like, the idea that you could be a market maker and sit in the middle and take a transaction was there. But whether that actually mapped to the market and whether the market would respond to that, and then you consider all of the different existing ways they did things and the existing barriers to adopt new ways of doing things, that's what really made the business model uncertain back then for a lot of companies. I mean, some companies had just bad business models, but even getting an internet company off the ground in 2000 was about really timing it with the right approach, the right pricing, the right problem solving that would actually grow the business. So we did a lot. When you think about it, I feel like we went in many different directions, but we only ended up going for a couple of years before we had to sell the business in 2002. I became CEO, and we ended up selling the business back then, mostly out of need, because 2002 was starting to crush a lot of companies and financing was not becoming readily available. So I'd love to sit here and say we had a strong, profitable business and didn't need to sell, but that wasn't the case. But by then we had found a business model that just seemed more sensible. We actually were essentially following the SaaS software model. So software as a service, where we were charging an annual fee for our software that we had built. And we were going to universities like Notre Dame and Indiana and New Mexico and Pennsylvania and Michigan and a bunch of these universities, and showing that this model as a way to make their procurement better was good. And so we actually started to get some traction, and that's what led to the sale of our company to a new company. And then I stayed with that company for 3.5 years and grew out the higher ed division with this model of selling software. So we were able to grow that to over 10 million in sales
Wow.
in the next couple of years. And then I left to start a second company called Moses and did that for 7 more years. But that first company was a little bit opportunistic, trying to somewhat time, the opportunity with the internet, and then getting crushed by the reality of what the .com days really were, which was both fun and then
Yeah.
very hard, and then actually settling on a business that even today, that I'd say Notre Dame, University of Pennsylvania, there's probably over a couple hundred universities that today are using some form of the software we created back then.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah, serious momentum. And just on the side, I'm in South Bend right now, and Notre Dame's like 7 minutes from me.
Yeah.
And our podcast actually has a partnership with university for our annual summit. So
Oh, great.
that's super interesting. Yeah, started that early,
Yeah.
and if they're still
I've
leveraging that
been to that
software.
campus many times, and the at the time the procurement director, a guy named Tim Gibney, who's
Yeah,
now probably retired, but he was really instrumental in probably even the sale of our business, because I think yeah, your listeners don't want all the details, but I think they had licensed a product called Ariba back then.
Mhm.
And a few big universities had licensed the product, but we knew it was very expensive and very hard to implement. And so we actually convinced a couple of universities to switch to this software as a service model, because we were offering it annual fee baked in. We had the hosting costs.
Yep.
And I recall Tim Gibney being really instrumental to actually helping our acquisition go through, getting on the phone with the acquirer, explaining that the model made sense. And yeah, Notre Dame's got a huge soft spot in my heart.
Incredible.
Tim invited me and my wife out to watch one of the football games one time. So we went out there. That was a fun time.
For sure. Awesome. So I'd love to hear you. So with such a kind of legal and then getting into really a tech background, what leads getting into 2015 then? What leads into Vestaboard? I mean, it's really a physical product now. You're selling direct to consumer, also corporate spaces. What leads to that? What's the inspiration behind Vestaboard in 2015?
Well, the second company was a company called Moses that did a lot of interactive mobile marketing. So back to my passion for creating things and trying to launch them, the idea was we would be essentially a SaaS platform for interactive mobile. So if brands and others were going to try to engage their audiences either through newspapers or TV, that everyone had a mobile phone with them, that they would be able to, engage with the brand in real time beyond just, logging onto the computer or watching an ad.
Yeah.
And so the platform called Moses did a lot of that interactivity. Where we ended up with the most traction was around live events. So we ended up powering interactivity at concerts like Taylor Swift or Justin Bieber,
Wow.
or Rascal Flatts, or all these bands. We had Live Nation as a customer. We had the 4 music labels as a customer. And if you walked into a venue, it might say you can have a chance to win something, and you could pick up something online after. And our platform powered that interactivity.
Wow.
And we took that platform to Coca-Cola and Red Bull and football games and soccer games and things like that with different brands. And we sold the business in 2013, in January of 2013. And I raised that just because it was important. It's important to kind of, okay, well, how did you get here? So that's 2 software companies, both kind of cloud-based and then mobile. And then I went to Paris in 2012. I think I was on the way back from a mobile conference in 2012, and I was in the Gare du Nord train station, and I saw this giant split flap display, which tells you when trains are leaving, and it was mesmerizing. It was the first time I'd ever seen it in person, anything like it.
Yeah.
And I remember just being fascinated by it. And I thought to myself, it would be fun if I could build like a small one in my house and send messages to my kids while I'm traveling. And at the time, I would put quotes on their walls so that, I could kind of inspire them with a quote. And they were all young and really into their dad at the time. And so that was the idea. Then it kind of stayed with me. We sold that other business. And in fact, a really great partner and friend of mine, Aaron Clark, ended up moving from California to Nashville with that business, with the Moses business that we sold, which comes into play for Vestaboard as well.
Mm-hmm.
And another guy named Mark Confroy was working with us at Moses, and he was already in Nashville. So we sold Moses. Didn't know quite what I was going to do. Was I going to start another company? But this idea kept eating away at me, and I kept thinking, okay, maybe there's something here, and I maybe investigated as a project and try and do it on the side.
Yeah.
But I realized that would be really, really difficult. And then it started to hit my own path about like, okay, am I going to start another company, and what is that company going to be? And this idea just kept speaking to me. So 2015. I was like, okay, well, I know how to do the cloud and mobile software to control something like this. So that'll be fun. That'll be an relatively easy part of the business.
Yeah.
Now I got to build this hardware, and am I going to do that? So I decided to try it. And, the only way you could do that once you have an idea that you want to try to make good is not to try to do it yourself. So I had to look for a couple of experts, people who'd built hardware before. I got really lucky finding a hardware product designer who had spent 10 years at Dell and a few years at a consulting firm, and then a few years at Amazon building the Amazon Echo.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
And so FISA joined me, and then we recruited a young fellow, another bunch of amazing stories, a guy named Ian Geyer. And he ended up being instrumental to the prototype, and now is instrumental to the manufacturing of Vestaboard. And then we just recruited some great engineers to work alongside us, and a great industrial design team. And it took quite a while. I didn't really fund it properly. I mean, I think to build a product like this, you really should probably have gone out and raised $10 million and said, okay, we're going to go build this thing and hope it works out. I ended up doing it on really low capital from 2015 to 2019. And in 2019 or even 18 started to accept some pre-orders for it. And then it really wasn't capitalized until 2020 when we started to ship the product. So it took us, and then COVID was hitting in 2020. So it was quite a time. And so that's the origin of it. It was an idea that did map somewhat to my skills. Yeah. And then it mapped to what I thought would be ultimately a good idea. And then importantly, Vestaboard has other product plans. People don't see that when they see our company. Obviously, they just see the one product, which is still our mission to get that one product successful and going.
Yep.
But I feel like there's even an entire business behind what we're doing beyond this single product. I chose to build it because I think Vestaboard's an impressive product. It has over 14,000 parts. We ship it like you'd expect a TV to arrive. And so Vestaboard itself as a messaging display is really impressive with all of its parts and what it can do and what it can show, especially when it's powered by the software.
Yep.
But in order to start the business and to build that product, I felt there'd have to be a series of opportunities that would come behind it. And we all are convinced there are, and we're just making sure that we've only been shipping Vestaboard now for 2.5 years. So we just want to make sure we get Vestaboard, the flagship product, as far as possible before we take on too much other stuff.
For sure. And to the listeners out there, make sure you guys do check out Vestaboard, because you can see it's a complex machine, but it's, like you said, it is very mesmerizing. It looks simple from the outside, but I couldn't even imagine what that R&D process was internally like. If you can take us back to, so you started in 2015, but didn't start shipping until around 2020 era. So what was that R&D process like? Taking your cloud background, the parts from your other guys as well.
Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted. Say that last bit again.
Oh, go ahead. Just the R&D process, working with the recruits that you brought on board. You had the cloud experience. They had also like the product engineering side.
Yeah. Yeah. It was all about the hardware. I mean, we built a prototype software app at some point in 2018 or 2019 to make sure it could be controlled. But that was kind of known. Like, you knew that Vestaboard itself was going to have a mini computer, and that mini computer would talk to the cloud, and it would receive messages from the cloud. And then all the stuff we do today on mobile and cloud was definitely needed, but it was definitely not the priority when we started the company. The priority was building a high quality product. Yeah. And it was about just recruiting the right talent and being very iterative. It is somewhat of a shame that when people see it, sometimes they'll be like, oh yeah, that's how you would make it. Of course, it's obvious, but it wasn't obvious when we set out to make it. Vestaboard's comprised of 132 what we call bits. These are the character units that power Vestaboard. So these are the flipping character units.
Wow.
And each Vestaboard has 132 of these. And inside this mechanism is a motor and a sensor and 64 flaps, and you've got to land it at the right character at the right time. And it can plug in modularly to the back of the Vestaboard.
Wow.
And, I look at this now and I'm like, yeah, I mean, of course, this is how it would be made. But during the process, it was very difficult. And then, when you're trying to build a product at scale, so if you were just building one at home for yourself, well, you can hack together a lot of different things and somehow get something to work. I think I had concluded if you tried to build just one of these by yourself with your own materials and got it to work, I mean, honestly, it would probably take 5 years and I don't know, $200,000, like something crazy just to build one if you were to try and do it yourself.
Yeah.
And I think even if we gave people our plans, they would have to go and spend a lot of money to try to replicate what we've done. When you're building it for manufacturing, that's a whole new level, because that's where you need to have design. And I think a lot of people forget that when I talk about a product designer, and I said, oh, Faiza is our main product designer, most people are going to assume, well, she made it look what it looks like. But in fact, that was the industrial design team, another great team led by Fred Bold, who decided what it would actually look like. Faiza's had the much harder job of saying, okay, that looks really pretty. Are we going to actually be able to design the parts and the pieces to come together in a way that is not only functional and makes the product work, but can it be manufactured? And that manufacturing for design piece is probably one of the hardest parts to get right when you're building any kind of product. I mean, it could be a Dell remote and you could have the best design for it and it looks really cool and it sits really nice in the hand. But if you can't, shape the plastic the way you want the plastic to shape, if you can't get two different parts that are different to come together affordably and stay together and get assembled together and make it work, or have the order of manufacturing and the parts operation be in a way that's efficient, you're still not going to get your beautifully designed product to market. So that was much more, I mean, I was always the optimist and always the one saying we were 6 months away from shipping, but we were 6 months away from shipping for 3.5 years. In retrospect, I gained a very, very deep understanding and appreciation of the skills and talent of engineers who work in hardware, who have to go through all the iterations, all the different considerations, and make decisions along the way that, really is like stuffing too big a blanket in too small a box, until you get to the end result and you get something that's tight and beautiful that you can actually produce and ship. So I can only describe the journey as harrowing. There was definitely times, especially when you're on thin capital. I'm sure there's been many well-capitalized hardware projects that failed. They've spent a ton of money and they kind of went through all the things I just talked about and they didn't get it to market for whatever reason. So for us to have gotten what we did to market on very, very thin capital, I think is really impressive, and a huge credit to the team that was recruited to build it. Absolutely.
So at launch, what were some of the intentional consumers at launch? So it's a high price item, but it's also substituting in real time through automation and software. Maybe at a coffee shop, it can have price points, or maybe at a home. Who was that main consumer you guys were targeting at launch?
So I mean, I think I knew intuitively there was a digital signage market in the business world. Like, that, as you mentioned, there's obvious use cases for signage in business. So a coffee shop who wants to post up menu prices. It could be a retail store that wants to draw people into the store with, some messaging around sales or around promotions or new items that come in. And so when I went to start the business and wonder, okay, is there a market for this product? I kind of knew there was a business market. I had a passion for the consumer side because of the origin of the idea. I was and still am genuine in the idea that, I could message my children while I'm traveling. They all got sick of Vestaboard from 2015 to 2020. I was working it all the time. They heard about it all the time. By the time I showed them the first working prototype, they weren't that impressed because they've just heard about Vestaboard all the time. And they're all older now. One's off in college, and my youngest is in the 9th grade, and my middle guy is in high school.
Awesome.
But what's so exciting is, so when you talk about the target, first we teased the idea at CES in 2018, and we were lucky enough to get an article written about us while we were there, and we turned on the pre-order because we were arriving at CES. We still hadn't quite figured it. So when you think about it, I think at CES we told everyone we would ship it by end of 2018, and then it took us another. On top of that, took us almost another 2 years on top of that. And part of that was due to COVID, but some of it was just that delay I kept talking about, which is very typical, as you'd probably know, for pre-order products or startup hardware products. But that test was important, and that article was important because, you know, it did light up the inbox with some orders in January that gave us validation, like, wow, people are interested in Vestaboard.
Yeah.
From a target market perspective, certainly there were some businesses. Like I had a mutual friend who's an architect and designer introduced me to a coffee shop, and they bought and ordered. But then just the type of people that I was hoping would buy, you know, moms and dads, probably a little bit around the technology area, but also design centered people who spend money on interior design and whatnot.
Certainly.
They migrated to the product too. And more, we're not only seeing the business use cases that are more obvious in real estate, education, healthcare, hospitality, retail, but we also, you know, grow the demand for it within homes. And the customer feedback has been really enormous in terms of how it does light up their home. It creates a really welcoming, fun space for their family or for their guests. Or if partners, you know, a combo is having just fun with the Vestaboard in their home. So we're seeing a lot of incredible use cases across home and business now.
Incredible. So say a consumer orders, how intuitive is the setup process once it arrives to their door, either at a coffee shop or at home, whatever that might look like? How quick would that be? How easy is it? Plug and play? What does that look like? Downloading the app, etc.
Yeah, I think that was an important insight we had too, is that if you're going to order a sign, currently, if you set up a digital sign in your business, for example, it's actually not that easy. There's, you know, you get a TV, you have to maybe attach some software, an Apple TV, you have to figure out how to control it, put content on it. I think part of what we set out to do was to have something that worked instantly out of the box, attach it to your Wi-Fi system, turn on your mobile app, connect the two, be able to then send messages over the internet from your mobile app to the device. And we made that really seamless. I won't say, and some of our customers won't say when we first shipped that was seamless, because we did have a few issues with those first units, trying to get them online and making sure they worked. But then once we got through that rough patch, we really have a product that can be up and running in 30 seconds. Takes maybe 20 minutes to install, especially if you're going to do it properly. You know, we recommend a recessed outlet like you would a television set, but it would be very simple, similar to mounting a television set. Same kind of bracket on the back, put it on. If you're not going to embed the power cord, then we do have longer power cords people can use to do it. So yeah, within 20 minutes, you're up and running and using your Vestaboard. And that's, I think, really, really different than a lot of digital signage for businesses. And of course, there's not much digital signage in homes anyway, but we made it super, super easy and super friendly. And then we have, in addition to the free software where you can send messages to it and have favorites in your history and add users, that's all part of our free software. And then we have a $95 a year offering that's called Vestaboard Plus. And we've created over 300 channels of content that can automatically flow to your Vestaboard. So you set up your own schedule, however you want to have it. That could be, you know, news, sports, weather, real-time sports scores, quotes and content that we've populated in the app. And we're continuing to add to that Vestaboard Plus, which just brings Vestaboard to life in a way that customers want to see it. So some of our customers are very excited and interested just to use it for their own messages. And then they may add one or two during the day on an automated basis. And then some of our other customers really love the automations, love integrating it with other parts of their smart home. And getting into a point where, you know, it's running many times just automatically to alert them of different things.
Incredible. Well, I like to conclude each episode with this. If you can share one piece of advice with an aspiring entrepreneur, maybe something you've learned, regret along the way, what would you say that would be?
I mean, I think this is common advice out there, I think, but I think the number one advice is to really listen to your instincts and to, you know, not really try to be honest and truthful to yourself about what you're doing and why you're doing it. I think it's easy for everybody, no matter what career they're pursuing, whether it's entrepreneurship in any form or a career or a job, that, you know, there's certain things that are going to be important to you, like earning a living and doing the things that are going to, you know, help you achieve those goals. I think it's really important to be honest about what is truly most important to you.
Yep.
And are you doing those things that are going to make you happy? Or are you doing it for other reasons that probably aren't going to make you happy? And so to me, that comes down to trusting your instinct and being honest with yourself. Because typically when you're working on something that just doesn't quite jibe with your whole being, or it doesn't, I'm not talking about working on a company, but making decisions and trying to do your financing of your company or trying to pick who you're going to work with, all the things that go into entrepreneurship. I think being really honest with yourself and making sure you're making the right decisions that, you know, map to yourself truthfully in the long term would be the best advice I could give.
For sure. Well, Dorrian, thank you so much for joining me today. And to listeners out there, make sure to check out Vestaboard at vestaboard.com.